Terraria is a game that I have a lot of time for. It was the first game to feature in my Dave's Fave series, and as a game that I've clocked many hundreds of hours into on Steam. I remember as a kid spending hours debating over whether Minecraft or Terraria was the better game, but I was missing the point. Despite Terraria clearly being inspired by Minecraft's early stages of release, they were two very different experiences, yet still two of the best Sandbox games ever made. And now, after 9 long years, Terraria's updates are finally coming to a close, with its aptly named 1.4 update, Journey's End. And you know it's the most definitive update ever because now Terraria can sync with my overpriced RGB gaming keyboard. We've already got well more than our money's worth from this game over the years, and yet Journey's End has added new game modes, new bosses, new world gen, and a list of new items and collectibles too numerous to even attempt listing in this video that have all helped to reinvigorate and help the game feel fresh and exciting once again. And while I will be going over the new features that Journey's End has added to this already incredibly content-packed game, a good portion of this video will be more of a love letter for a game that I hold very close to my heart. One of the things that Terraria does best is its progression path. While that path is clear, it is not linear. There's no set course to follow, nobody tells you where to go or what to do, and the way that you progress can vary greatly between different playthroughs. It is incredibly enjoyable watching your character go from having nothing to becoming a flying mecha wizard that can summon hellfire to smite your enemies. From collecting mana stars and heart crystals to defeating the game's many bosses, every little bit of progression is super satisfying. And despite this progression path, Terraria also does a lot of things to bolster its replayability, particularly in its world generation. Apart from the fact that the worlds themselves are randomly generated, you'll either have corruption or crimson, different ores in both hard mode and pre-hard mode, and even different biome placement and spread. Without a seed, no two worlds are exactly the same, and neither will your progression be. And this contributes to the fact that I have no qualms about starting a new world every time I come back to Terraria, because every moment, from those humble beginnings to the far more complex encounters down the track and the journey along the way, are all a heap of fun. And that's not to imply that there's a shortage of content, because for your money, this is easily one of the best buys on Steam and has been for a long time. There is an array of ores to dig, biomes to explore, and bosses to fight. Terraria isn't the sort of game that you just play for a little while. I mean, you just killed Skeletron and have gone through and looted the dungeon. That must be it, right? Nope, you frickin' dipstick, you ain't even halfway through the game yet. It's hard mode time. Where Terraria really sets itself apart from other sandboxes like Minecraft, aside from the fact that, you know, it's in 2D, is through its combat. It's a big part of what the game builds itself around without trampling over its sandbox roots. While some of the later game fights might look ridiculously complex, the core combat mechanics are really quite simple. There aren't any dodge rolls or combo inputs, and the swath of weapons that the game throws at you are all pretty straightforward to use. A huge part of the combat, and really the gameplay in general, is mobility. Both horizontal and vertical movement are emphasized, considering you're only working in 2D, and being able to dodge attacks and distance yourself, especially from bosses, is very important. Movement is very smooth and precise, and is embellished over time with accessories such as the ability to double jump, dash, or fly that become incredibly important not only in combat, but in general for traversing the landscape. What's clever about it is how Terraria builds up that complexity as you go. From fighting slimes to giant mechanical beasts, it's the same principles of using your character's increasing mobility and the massive arsenal of weapons provided to get the job done. Terraria can always find itself being a bit grindy, which for this sort of game probably ought to be expected. While making this video, I couldn't find an aglet anywhere on the map, so I had to fish for one. And of course, I had to open about 300 crates to finally get one. In fact, it took me about as long to fish up an aglet as it did for me to purify this whole area of corruption with purification powder. So if you're wondering why I never upload, that's fucking why. But while it does incorporate some more RPG-like aspects and focuses more on its combat, Terraria doesn't stray away from what makes it a sandbox at its core. As mentioned, unlike a certain game that doesn't need to be named but will be anyway, Starbound, Terraria doesn't rely on storyline or a set progression path to continue the gameplay and gives players true freedom in how they progress. Its world gives you a canvas for you to shape as your own. In all honesty, it's not spoken about a lot, but Terraria gives players a lot of creative freedom despite being stuck in its 2D landscape, and allows you to get inspired and build some really cool things. But if we're going to talk about the things that make Terraria great, we're certainly not going to skip over its soundtrack. Such a variety of mellow daytime and biome themes to intense boss fight music. Terraria's soundtrack is retro, funky, and a real asset to setting the kind of atmosphere and style that it goes for. And visually, I like the look of the game. It's from that period just before pixel graphics became not only the norm but seemingly the requirement for every indie game that was ever made, but it does the pixel graphics style well. Not only are its sprites distinct and clean, but the world itself is enhanced with its many environments and variants and is brought together with its sweeping parallax backgrounds, all of which have been updated for the better in the game's latest release. Speaking of which, I guess I'd better stop gushing about what I love so much about Terraria, because we could be here all day. It's time to have a bit of a look into the final update Terraria will likely ever receive, Journey's End. First off, Master Mode. Because Expert Mode wasn't punishing enough for you sadistic bastards. Though being quite similar in terms of additions to Expert Mode, Master Mode makes all enemies even more bulky and hit even harder, as well as causing you to drop all of your money on death and providing you with a cheeky extra accessory slot. If you're an experienced player, I highly recommend doing a Master Mode run in multiplayer, or hell, single player if you really hate yourself, because it can be ruthlessly difficult and only makes finally killing each boss infinitely more satisfying. In general, the game has not only seen a plethora of new items added, but a lot of rebalancing and tweaks to many existing features and weapons as well. All I'm gonna say is that someone at Relogic has a serious boner for the Sun Fury. Fishing has been severely nerfed, which in all honesty was a long time coming, and short swords actually have a viable use now. I'm just glad they didn't nerf shotguns though, cause I'm a real boomstick boomer. Block Swap is my favourite addition to the game, a genuine game changer, especially when revamping old structures, but in general it was a massive quality of life improvement for building and considerably enhanced the more creative side of the game. Journey mode, however, was a little weird. It was basically just playing classic Terraria but with cheats enabled. You can control lots of different things like the time, weather and world difficulty. You start with a pair of wings and a summon staff, as well as being able to spend items on research, and once you'd researched a specific amount of an item, you could then spawn it infinitely like you'd be able to in a creative mode. I think that this would function well as a utility, perhaps for content creation and the like, but I don't see why it couldn't have been maybe a supplementary mode alongside an actual proper creative mode, because really, Journey mode is just a creative mode with extra steps. The UI has seen a refresh in Journey's End as well, particularly the character and world creation screens. They're far more intuitive now, and the world creation gives you more options, such as being able to choose whether you have Corruption or Crimson, and even has a random name generator that gives me serious Dwarf Fortress vibes, so I won't complain about that. I also enjoyed the new bestiary interface, and while it wasn't necessarily the most useful interface, it was cool to cycle through all the enemies I'd encountered and was a neat little bonus for completionists to enjoy. The new health and mana bars are cool, but I really wish that they actually showed the exact number of hit points and mana you had left without having to hover over them. Though the classic mana and health bar don't look quite as neat, they're simply more convenient. Pylons are a useful mechanic as well, allowing you to fast travel to different areas of the map and conveniently set up outposts and villages in different biomes or locales, though I feel a little indifferent to the new Village of Happiness mechanics. Really, I was quite put off with them to begin with, but did grow to appreciate them more as I experimented with it. They punish you for having too many NPCs too close to one another, which I've always tended to do. I don't see any particular reason the game needs to punish you for this, and I probably would have liked some more leniency, but certain NPCs liking or hating each other or which biome they're in does add a nice challenge. There's been a nice world gen overhaul as well, making certain biomes a lot prettier as well as adding more mini biomes and variants around the place. While not being a real game changer, giving the world a bit of a refreshing facelift is certainly a welcome addition. Though, to be nitpicky, one new addition I'm not a huge fan of was how the dungeon is now largely blocked up by huge rubble sections. Really slowed down your run and stopped you from flying through it when you first dive in, which is a lot more fun. Visually, the game has seen a solid improvement, particularly for enemy sprites and the parallax backgrounds, many of which have been overhauled for the better. Along with the new Windy Day event and how plants and trees will sway in the wind, the world itself just feels more alive. But it's not just the visuals and environments that have been overhauled, however, as there have been several new music tracks added, which is certainly a welcome addition. And just as a final mention, T-Modloader has made its way onto Steam and has designs for future Steam Workshop support, as well as texture pack functionality being built into the base game, which makes modding and customization simply more accessible, and I think is a great move by Relogic. While Journey's End may not be the most definitive update that Terraria has ever received, what it has done is give the game a refresh, a facelift, an overhaul that helps to make the game feel almost like a new experience again. And to be honest, for what we paid for this game and after all the updates and content it's received over the years, it's more than we deserved. Terraria will always be one of my favourite games, the best value for money purchase I think I've ever made. It's such a fantastic game with such replayability, a genuine and satisfying sense of progression, an enthralling combat system, a sense of both directional and creative freedom. I could go on here, but for brevity's sake I won't. And now Journey's End has added a swath of new content, Easter eggs and balances to the game, many largely inconsequential, but it has still refreshed the game and only added even more to its already massive experience. And sure, the final major update that Terraria will ever receive may be called Journey's End, but my journey with Terraria ain't over yet. Not by a long shot.